I invite you to join us in a new initiative that I announced in my State of the Union address, an effort to help more young men of color overcome the odds, because so many boys in this country need that mentor to help them become a man and a good father.
President Obama at the National Prayer Breakfast yesterday raising the issue of mentoring for young men of color, an issue that challenges all of us to do more in our communities and our schools. The GRIO is honoring African-American leaders this month for doing exactly that, including my next guest, General Colin Powell. After a lifetime in military and civilian public service, his real passion is education. General Powell joins me now.
Great
Welcome.
pleasure to be with you today, Andrea.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk to you about education, about your role in the community. Let's talk about CCNY and what you've created in New York. At CCNY, it's a school my dad went to. It was a school that you went to. It was the place of choice for young men and women in that day who didn't have a lot of other options. It's a public university. It's
a public university formed in 1847 as the Free Academy of New York, the first one like it in the country, where we are going to take all the kids of the people, of all the people, and give them a chance to get a good education. And it's been doing that for all these years. It took me in 1954 as just a kid born in Harlem, raised in the South Bronx, and gave me a quality education, allowed me to go in the Army and compete with guys from West Point and Harvard and Princeton and elsewhere. And the reason I got that education was because the citizens of New York said, what do we have that is more important to do than to educate the next generation? And now, in this phase of my life, I'm back at CCNY with the Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. I'm very proud of it, but the reason I'm so proud is because I'm doing the same thing with the people up there for a new generation of minority kids and immigrant kids that was done for me so many, many years ago.
I want to show a clip of you at CCNY. I think it may be at the opening of the Powell School.
It isn't about Colin Powell. It isn't about the Colin Powell School, as it is named. It's about the kids. It's about the youngsters who come here seeking a better life, seeking to make their parents proud, seeking to be good citizens, seeking to do what they can for their fellow citizens. That's what it's all about.
Now, so many barriers have changed from those days in 1954, when I think you once told me that when you were courting Alma, your wife, and driving from New York down to Birmingham, you couldn't stop at a public rest station or at a diner or at a motel. There were only a few places along that way that you could stop from here down south. Those things have changed. What hasn't changed as we think about Black History Month?
Well, let's start with the reality that a lot has changed. My goodness, if you look at the African-American leaders that we have in corporate America, that we have in political America, that we have in military America, we should be very proud of what we have done as a nation. But in doing that, we have also left behind a group of young people who do not have the kind of mentorship, do not have the kind of family structure that I had and those who've been successful had, and have not had the quality education that is needed so badly, especially in the 21st century, to prepare them for successful lives in our country. And so that is why it's become a passion of my life and my wife and my son, and you're part of our team, and we thank you for that.
I want to be on Team Powell.
Yes. But we've got to provide these young men and women, and not just African Americans, but all young American children coming up, with the right sort of start in life. If you don't get the best start in life, you're at a disadvantage. That's why early childhood education is so important. That's why if the family isn't intact, and we have so many in the African American community, where 70% of our children are being born without benefit of a normal two-parent family, single parent. It isn't that a single parent can't do it, it's just a lot harder. And when that parent needs help, we have to be there with Big Brothers and Big Sisters and faith-based programs and Boys and Girls Clubs and all the other things that give a kid structure, make a kid part of a tribe. If the kid isn't getting a good tribe, the kid will find a bad tribe, get in trouble, he's on his way to jail. We got enough of them in jail. The good news also is that the dropout rate has declined. We're doing a better job of keeping these kids in school and getting them out the other end, and then getting them into trade schools or community colleges or into college. So the problem is solvable. We know where the dropout factories are. We know what to do about that, and we're doing it, and the things are getting better.
I wanted to share a Smithsonian documentary that features you among other great African-American leaders. Let's watch.
When I first went to Germany in January of 1959, I had just finished my training in Columbus, Georgia, at Fort Benning. And in Columbus, Georgia, it was still segregated. There was discrimination. There was racism. And so for me as a young lieutenant who couldn't go off the post in Columbus, Georgia, can go off the post anywhere in Germany, it was a breath of freedom. It was a breath of freedom not only for me, but for the Germans, who might have thought otherwise about black soldiers, but recognized that we can do the job as well as anyone, and you should not judge us by the color of our skin.
And that documentary is going to air on the Smithsonian Channel on
Yes.
February 17th. But you've been concerned about some of the cultural issues. I know you've read deeply into this, and you talk to kids, black and white, about education and about the cultural influences on them. And part of that is the internet. And you're an early advocate and proponent. You were involved with AOL. But what about reading? What about reading offline, reading in a more old-fashioned way?
You know, I keep focusing on this with young people, particularly the minority kids. You don't have time to waste. And there's nothing wrong with the internet, but use the internet to read books. There's a great deal of debate about some of the cultural things that are taking place in our society. You know, I'm kind of old, perhaps a little too old for hip-hop, and I appreciate the hip-hop culture, and I understand why young people like it. But does it have to focus on misogynistic themes? Does it have to be so degrading of women? You know, if the guys we celebrate in Black History Month, such as Dr. Martin Luther King or Mrs. Rosa Parks, if they were to see some of the things we're doing, they'd be very disappointed. They'd say, we haven't come as far as we need to come. And so we can't afford to waste time. We need to spend our time getting our education. We need to spend the time making sure that Black History Month is not just something we celebrate the past, in which we celebrate the future as well. And the future are our kids. And if we don't prepare them for that future, they will not be successful. And more importantly, the country will not be successful. And the next generation, as you know, Andrea, are minorities, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, African Americans, and other Americans, as they're sometimes called. They're going to be the majority of the population. They're going to be over 50%. They have to be prepared to be the leaders of the country, and that's what I'm trying to work on with my wife, my family, and wonderful, dedicated people who are participating in this effort, such as Andrea Mitchell.
Well, thank you for that undeserved shout-out. But then we have the lack of bipartisanship, and the most recent setback for immigration change or reform is, the speaker said, not now. It seems to be a lot of resistance to even having some sort of compromise on immigration. At a time when our workforce desperately needs to keep some of these highly educated foreign students in particular,
If not now, when? We keep putting it off. The beginning of the President Bush's administration, when I was the Secretary of State, we were moving on this, and then 9/11 threw it off track. But sufficient time has passed so that we should all understand by now that we are an immigrant nation. We are fueled with every new wave of immigrant who comes to this country. People wonder, are we still the great country that we pretend to be or present ourselves to be? And the answer is yes. They're lined up at all of our embassies and consular offices saying, I want to go to America. 800,000 students from other countries are in America. And whenever they get the skills that can be useful in America, when they graduate with a PhD in computer science, give them a green card. The DREAM Act should be a no-brainer. And so I think we really have to buckle down and do something about immigration reform and do it as quickly as we can. And this has been a siren song of mine for many years.
You've been quoted, you said that there's a dark vein of intolerance in your Republican Party.
I will repeat that now. There are certain elements within the party which go out of their way to demonize people who don't look like the way they'd like them to look like, or who came from some other place. And I think the party has to deal with this. And the party says we're doing it. They came out of last year's election with a lot of ideas about how they were going to make themselves a little more acceptable. And yet you see things happening. You see members of the party in senior levels making statements about women, making statements about minorities that once again make the party look less tolerant than it should be. When you see a party that seems to, in some states, go out of their way to sort of restrict voting on the pretense that there is a lot of fraud going on, And I want to see a party, either Democrat or Republican party, that is working to get everybody to vote. Isn't that what America's all about? Get everybody to the polling place, not keep it harder to get people to the polling place. And they should have learned a practical lesson when they tried this last year, say in Florida. Rather than stopping the minority vote, they came out and drove. You're not going to stop us. And the lesson should have been learned there, that if you try to tell people they can't vote, you'll get more and more people voting and longer lines, and they'll wait to vote. That's what America is all about.
Memorably, you endorsed Barack Obama on Meet the Press. Are you still a Republican, or what do you think you are?
I was a Republican for the 8 presidential elections before Mr. Obama, where I voted for a Republican president. But when I was in the phase of deciding what I should do in 2008, I was disturbed by the direction in which the party was moving. And I made it clear at the time. And I thought Mr. Obama was the best choice for the economic reforms that we needed and for other things that we needed. And so people said, well, does that make you a Democrat? And I'm still a Republican. And I think the Republican Party needs me more than the Democratic Party needs me. And you can be a Republican and still feel strongly about issues such as immigration and improving our education system and doing something about some of the social problems that exist in our society and our country. I don't think there's anything inconsistent with this. And as I go around the country, everybody's focusing on 2014, 2016. When I said, don't think that Superman or Superwoman is coming in 2016. If you don't like the lack of civility, if you want to do something about the lack of civility in this country, it's the super people who are going to change it, not whoever the next president is. We, the people, have to start pushing back on all the incivility that exists in our society, especially in our media. And we also have to start listening to other sides to get a more balanced perspective with respect to the issues of the day and make the compromises necessary to keep our country moving forward, just as our founding fathers did in 1787.
I just wanted to finally ask you about all this tension with Vladimir Putin, the Olympics opening. We've seen today an attempted hijacking going into Sochi and eavesdropped conversations being posted on an official Russian website of an American diplomat. Putin's a tough customer. You've had to deal with him.
I know Mr. Putin very, very well, and I've done a lot of things with him, from telling him that we were withdrawing from the ABM treaty to also negotiating an arms control treaty with the Russian Federation. And he's tough. We have to remember his background. He was KGB. And he enjoys support with the Russian people because he has brought some order to the country. I'm disappointed that he doesn't understand that he has the power to put the country on a more democratic basis, and he's missing a historic opportunity by not doing that. And I'm disturbed with a lot of the things that he does with respect to the running of the country. But at the same time, he is the president of Russia, and I think we have to be a little more cautious in the way in which we talk about him and the way in which we sort of interfere with his principal objectives, just as we should be free to tell him when we disagree about human rights policies of the Russian Federation or other things that they're doing and trying to draw people into their economic union rather than the European Union. And so we all ought to be big boys about this and not petty. I don't know how Ms. Nuland's words got onto Russian television. I don't know. I don't know who put it on YouTube. That's where it came from. Right. But in any event, this little episode will pass, and I don't think too much will be made of it in the long run, because we have to work with them. We have to have them work with us. But I think both sides should take a little more care in the way in which we share points of view with each other.
Colin Powell, as always, thank you, General.
Thank you, Andrew.
And the red dress has become a symbol of the battle against heart disease. And today, on National Wear Red Day, we're shining a spotlight on the fight against heart disease. According to the American Heart Association, an estimated 43 million American women are affected by heart disease, and it's going to claim 1 out of every 3 women's lives, making it the #1 killer of women. And so today, I'm joining other women in proudly showing our colors, red, today.